Alright, cool, so I'm live. Alright, so it's the 14th one. Um, I guess I should be doing the same with the shape. I'm not that short. I am short, but not that short. I guess I should do the shameless plugs or like we comment, all that bullshit. But anyway, let's learn about philosophy. So, so hang on, one, two. So, golden new philosopher, another week, some German dude, and I have to check him out. So here we are. There we go. So this guy is a philosopher that came from um, individual point of view of philosophy and used that in economics. So
Greetings! We have quite a few fans of Austrian economics that watch this channel, and I would be remiss if I didn't present Ludwig von Mises. This biographical feature is from the Mises Institute. You may find it somewhere else on YouTube, but the quality is so bad it's almost unwatchable. This is the best quality you will find on YouTube for this presentation. It is fantastic. Mises was relentless in his commitment to sound economic policy and liberty. A great introduction to him, if you are not familiar with him already, is in the Mises Reader. I have a link in the description for you to check it out.
The individual consumer should be concerned about economics and economic theory because you just, by the words we use here, you suggest the answer. They are consumers. That is, they are people who go into the market and they would like to have the largest choice of products. They would like to have those products at the best possible price. And there's one system that tends to satisfy that, and that's the free market system.
All that stuff is economics, and whether or not we have jobs, how much we're taxed, how much inflation we have, whether we have good housing or poor housing, whether we have lots of food or little food, or VCR or CD player or any of that stuff. That's all economics. And so therefore, everyone is living economics every day of the year.
One of Mises' insight is that in a market system, the consumer is king, right? Who determines what businesses produce? Who determines in what quantities goods are produced or services are produced? Who determines when a factory should open and when a factory should close? When is it obsolete? Mises says it's the consumer ultimately who does this. The consumer goes into the market, and with every dollar, he votes on, I want this, I don't want this. That's how a market system works. It's a very free and democratic system in this sense.
And if we don't understand it, as many societies have not, we end up like Eastern Europe. There's no food in the stores. or where they have massive systemic problems of economic coordination, where they've got grain rotting in the fields and no bread. That's what happens when people don't understand economics.
Ludwig von Mises, an Austrian economist, became this century's most uncompromising champion of individual liberty. In a career spanning over 60 years, Mises, the preeminent scholar, prolific writer, and revered teacher, developed a body of scientific theory in support of the free market economy. Mises set out to prove that economic prosperity laid not in the hands of interventionist government, but in the unrestricted actions of individuals, buying, selling, and producing in an open market. Having witnessed the abuses of statism during the communist and fascist tides that swept Europe into the darkness of 2 world wars, Mises fought the prevailing statist political and economic policies of his time.
Think of economics as like a wide philosophy, if that makes sense.
For the advancement of freedom.
And you have to admire the wonderful austerity of an intellect that could pursue truth in the kind of atmosphere he came into, when the alternatives were simply assumed to be one or the other.
It's like what you do with your time and all that stuff as well. And you can also, besides politics, economics is probably besides politics and law, economics is probably a clear example of a public philosophy as well. So if that makes sense.
Version of statism. He understood that they were all the same thing, that they were all doomed to fail, at least to fail in their terms. They do succeed for their rulers, not for their subjects. It's a real enigma why people are so averse to real free market capitalism even now. Here we are in the century that has seen Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Hitler, Castro, Pol Pot, and we're still being warned against the robber barons of the 19th century.
Yeah, it's also it's just unbelievable politics and all that shit. So it's also, if you want to have an effective philosophy, come with it as with a social point of view as well. And also learn how to write philosophy, which is something I didn't do.
I don't know that Jay Gould or John D. Rockefeller ever killed anyone. The state has killed countless people, and yet we're always supposed to remain on guard against these greedy villains of yesteryear.
I would say that Mises was great because he was so profound and so conscientious, so determined, and so consistent and persistent in seeking the truth and setting it forth as he understood it.
The values he was attempting to defend and did defend were American values. They were the values of individual freedom. They were the values of the limit.
See, the things I got recommended is what is the red pill stuff that I'm kind of learning about. And this guy got recommended to me as well. See if he doesn't include Harry. No. This is the individual philosophy part aspect of it. But since he's drawing his work from values, you know, idea simulation.
Government, the values of human rights protected from government intrusion. There were the values of opportunity for all people. The values of letting people earn what they could, keep what they earned, and not have it taken away by an intrusive government.
But I guess in thinking about it, the most impressive thing was the man's integrity, his honesty, his belief in individuals and individual liberty. And just a man you never forget, man of character.
On September 11, 1981, in a moving speech delivered on the 100th anniversary of her husband's birth, Margaret von Mises describes the man she knew.
What I can tell you about Ludwig von Mises, the man, is this. He was, first of all, a human being concerned about the state of the world. And foremost, he was a fighter. As Hamlet says, he was a man. Take him for all in all, I shall not look upon his like again. For Ludwig von Mises was far more than an eminent economist. He understood history as few historians understand it. He was learned in
William Strauss, if you want to know about civilization history stuff.
psychology,
Maybe Graham Hancock as well.
philosophy, law, and government. But his intellectual creative energy was directed towards one goal: freedom. Freedom for himself and for all mankind.
As a young boy in Vienna during the late 1800s, Mises developed an intense interest in history. Sparked by his reading of popular history journals with stories and photographs of the German Kaisers, the young Mises was fascinated, yet later
Normally, philosophers do stem from a point of view for history, so I know history, so just a love of reading of anything.
made by the obvious bias of the German historians. Mises later wrote about his discovery in his memoirs.
I was then not yet 7 years old and devoured those articles with insatiable fervor. But it was my intense interest in historical knowledge that enabled me to readily perceive the inadequacy of
A good philosopher is able to extract information, and articulate ideas.
German historicism. It did not deal with scientific problems, but with the glorification of Prussian policies and Prussian authoritarian government.
Mises discovered when he was a young student that historians and other experts in social sciences were not as devoted to the pursuit of truth as they had thought. They were influenced by their own ideology and a hidden agenda and worship of the state.
By 1900, practically everyone in the German-speaking countries was either...
Obviously, at the time, the state or the country is public direction sort of thing. At the moment, I'm looking at Red Bull sort of thing. So.
A statist or a state socialist. Capitalism was seen as a bad episode which fortunately had ended forever. The future belonged to the state. All others were to be regulated in a way that would prevent businessmen from exploiting workers and consumers.
When he got to be university age, he went to the University of Vienna. He was set to investigating the housing problem, and I guess he did a paper.
Wait, what happened?
A master's thesis for a professor. Meantime, he read Karl Menger's Principles of Economics. Karl Menger was the founder of the Austrian School of Economics. He was the major professor at the University of Vienna. And he read it, and that changed his life. He then saw that economics was really a theory, it was a way of looking at the market. And it was a set of laws that you could apply to any situation. And then using that, he was able to analyze the housing situation and show that basically the problem with housing in Vienna, taxes were too high, property taxes were too high, and there was a dearth of housing.
Mises had witnessed firsthand how government intervention in the housing market had created a shortage of low-cost rents for the laboring poor in Vienna. High taxes levied on real estate profits had created a disincentive for entrepreneurs to invest in additional housing.
It then dawned on me that all the real improvements in the conditions of the working classes were the result of capitalism, and that social laws frequently brought about the very opposite of what the legislation was intended to achieve.
Oh, this is cool.
To the extent that we're taxed, we literally don't know what we're doing. The fruit of our action, the consequence of our action, is taken from us. It may be put to good use. It always allegedly is. I'm skeptical of that. But let's give the state the benefit of the doubt. Let's suppose Tip O'Neill really is another Mother Teresa, and that people like this are using our money more charitably than we would. Okay, but we don't know that. So, humanly speaking, we're simply not going to keep making the same effort we did to acquire it. I always say there's a 3-word lexicon that explains the tax economy: need, greed, and compassion. Need now means wanting someone else's money. Greed means wanting to keep your own. And compassion is the sentiment of the politician who wants to arrange the transfer.
Greed. Keeping stuff to yourself. Fuck, I got my sister's family staying here. See, the thing is, economics, how people interact, what was I just thinking? How people move around, access to. I'm trying to write theories of like how people access information and produce original thinking. And unfortunately, you can't move up if you don't have the information how to move up, and it's a bit hard to actually do it. So that's bullshit.
These good old words have been completely perverted, in other words, by the tax economy.
After the receipt of his doctorate degree, Mises began his first monumental work in the field of economics. In his book published in 1912, The Theory of Money and Credit, Mises examined the problems of currency.
The Austrian theory explains in a way that other schools of economic thought have been unable to explain why it is the government, the central bank, the overextension of credit, the creation of too much money, that in effect, inevitably almost sets the stage for an economic downturn. And of course, politicians, being very short-sighted and only thinking to the next 6 months or the next election, will like the euphoric short-term sense that you get from excess money creation, but they never could quite understand why that creates bad economic conditions down the road as individuals.
See, the thing is, economic conditions, if you're like stupid or that destitute, you can't do much besides the immediate actions of the thing. So,
and businesses and the economy are unable to sustain the economic activity that has been generated by that easy money policy. And the Austrian theory explains that it is the inflation that governments are so prone to engage in.
Local communities are really important, guys.
And that sets the stage for economic bad times. And if you go through history and look at when we've had periods of economic contraction, they are almost always associated with some sort of mismanagement of the monetary system by the government.
Mises argued very strongly for the gold standard because he was aware of the fact that if you had a gold standard, you couldn't have a government agency, the central bank, counterfeiting the money, because he knew that caused the business cycle, and he didn't want a business cycle to be reoccurring. It's also argued that...
Yeah, business cycle, guys. Sunscreen is summertime, and umbrellas during wintertime, the rainy season.
The gold standard provides stable prices and economic growth. And I strongly believe this, as all Austrian economists do. But the most important point about a gold standard is that the money comes from the marketplace and doesn't come from the politicians. It's, you know, if you had a primitive culture, people wouldn't be picking up pieces of paper and exchanging and calling them money. So it's only
calling it money is kind of like a mutual trading point sort of thing. So to be honest, there's probably been more difference between equity, I know equity, equality, if money wasn't, or something like money wasn't around, where society didn't have a collective things to trade with, and just rely on skill and talent, there'll be more poverty around, you know, poverty around.
in this
social welfare, guys.
A so-called sophisticated modern economy where people are deceived into believing that pieces of paper have value, and creating duplications of pieces of paper don't create wealth. You know,
now, if you notice this language just then, Von Paul believed that if it had value, you know, referring to money, people believed if it had value. Belief in value
creates wealth is production. The gold standard provides an honest exchange. That doesn't mean that every transaction has to be gold. You can have a gold certificate that can only be printed when there's gold behind it. So the true gold standard is that the gold and the paper money are equal. You can't print up a lot of paper.
And by the way, when the United States went off the gold standard in 1933, I know thousands of economists literally attacked it. They wrote a petition to Congress saying, go back to the gold standard. Of course, that's all been forgotten now.
Of course, should be common knowledge, right? While people go to wars, or social groups battle one another, left and right politics, people in those resisting groups don't want other people in those resistance groups to go to another side. Because the more people in the other side, in theory, the more power you would have.
The outbreak of World War I interrupted the careers of many people in Europe, and Mises was no exception. After 3 years at the front as an artillery officer, Mises developed typhoid and spent the remainder of his service working for the economics division of the Ministry of War.
And after the war, he couldn't get a paid teaching post, and he got this privat docent post at the University of Vienna, where he had a seminar, but he couldn't. But he was discriminated against, and he was a lone man on the totem pole in the department, and couldn't find a paid post anywhere. There were three. Well, his friends and students.
Learning tip 101. I just discovered this guy, so it's kind of, I don't know anything about him. So do watch Darko's intro videos and stuff of that nature.
Say there were three reasons for this. One, that he was Jewish, and anti-Semitism was already rampant in Austria and Germany. Two, that he was believed in laissez-faire, uncompromising laissez-fairist, and Germany and Austria were both moving rapidly toward the idea of the corporate state, essentially fascism, or Marxism. These are the only two options. Either a Marxist or fascist. And so laissez-faire is considered reactionary, Neanderthal, evil, and that sort of stuff. And three, he was uncompromising. In other words, he was personally, people call him abrasive. I didn't find him abrasive at all, ever. I mean, very extremely sweet and lovable person. And but what he was totally uncompromising. He wouldn't give in. He wouldn't say, yes, you're right half the time, something like that. He wouldn't start qualifying immediately and say, yes, socialism was very good. There's one slight flaw here, which I like to explore. He just smashed them. So the story is if he had one or two of these defects, it wouldn't be so bad, but three was too much.
Well, many people don't get recognized until after they're gone. And it's apparently true in Mises' case. He had recognition, he had some, but not from academia, not from the establishment. And as I say, he was so devoted to his pursuit of truth that he just kept on.
The pursuit of truth, noble but shared, so therefore inherently not individually. The tenet of individual philosophy.
To earn a living, Mises held a post with the Vienna Chamber of Commerce as an economic advisor to the Austrian government. It was here that Mises wielded considerable influence into Austria's political and economic destiny. After World War I, amidst the turmoil of defeat, many Eastern European nations looked to the example of the
One reason why I want to go to thinkers and think tanks is they're the ones who, I reckon, I'm proposing the premise of my view is conspiracy theories because they're the ones who kind of leak in all the politics and stuff in schools and educational systems. So
Russian Revolution and followed the communist tide. Austria's fate now laid in the hands of its Marxist leader, Otto Bauer.
And he wanted to bring about a communist system. He was dedicated his whole life to that, to being a pure Marxist-Leninist. And Mises sat for 2 straight days and nights or something like that, and that like convinced him, reluctantly, not to do it because there'd be food shortage, there'd be devastation, and wouldn't be able to work. And he was convinced. And so Bauer was reviled by communists ever since for turning around and betraying the revolution. And Bauer hated Mises ever since then because he felt Mises made him betray his principles by persuading him not to do it.
Mises had saved Austria from communism, but post-war bank credit inflation proved to be a greater enemy. During World War I, most European nations had abandoned the gold standard, and Mises had to fight the modern rage for cheap money. He pressed for a balanced budget and a halt to all increases in paper currency. The Austrian crown stabilized in 1922, although it was greatly depreciated. Unable to forestall the inflationary effects of continued government spending, the Austrian bank collapsed in 1931.
Mises also predicted the Great Depression, but the only economist in those days, because he realized because of the business cycle theory that there's going to be a big crash, and everybody else was saying, no, we have a new era, we have a central banking, we have a Fed, and therefore it's going to be permanent prosperity without depression. And meantime, while he was doing this, he was teaching at the University of Vienna and writing great books, marvelous books. Plus, he was holding a private seminar in his Chamber of Commerce office, which was totally unaccredited, and nobody gets anything from it. And it was considered a great honor to be invited to attend this private seminar. This Mises' private seminar, which continued from about 1920 to I think 1934 when he left Austria, was the center in all of Europe for intellectual, for not only for economics, but for philosophy and history and political science and all that, for research and discussion. And people came to it from all over Europe and even in the United States. And it was extremely influential.
All who belonged to this circle came voluntarily, guided only by their thirst for knowledge. In these meetings, we discussed all important problems of economics and the sciences of human action. In this circle, the younger school of Austrian economics lived on. In this circle, the Viennese culture produced one of its last blossoms. Here, I was neither teacher nor director of the seminar. I was merely primus inter pares, first among peers, who himself benefited more than he gave.
One of Mises' famous students, Felix Kaufmann, who was a philosopher of science, made up a whole set of songs about the Mises seminar that took Viennese songs of the period and put lyrics about Mises in it. And they sang it to us at this in Vienna a few years ago. It was just great.
Kinder, hört mich an, weil heute Freitag ist, gibt es ein Mises Privatseminar. Und dort geh ich hin, wenn auch ein Mittag ist, süß und duftend wie keiner noch war. Denn der Blütenduft muss vergehen, doch die Wahrheit, die bleibt bestehen. Und die Wahrheit findest du in Mises Kreis. Jeden Abend Sender und Schaffelweiß fand man richtig zu streiten erst an. wenn die Baten die Hand dort anschauen.
Vienna seminar student Friedrich von Hayek later won the Nobel Prize in Economics for business cycle theories rooted to Mises' teachings.
The reason why I think red pill works is because of economic understanding. They touch very small pockets of it. I think most people overall don't have a grasp, even though they might have a good grasp on small business shit. But what do I know?
In a speech delivered in his professor's honor in 1956, Hayek described Mises' influence.
Professor Mises wrote the book which made the most profound impression on my generation, Socialism, which appeared in 1922. To none of us young men who read the book when it appeared was the world ever the same again. Not that we at once swallowed it all. For that it was too strong a medicine and too bitter a pill. Professor Mises' teaching seemed directed against all.
A lot of problems with modern social theorists is people want to take from one what you're good at and just give it to the other. Hence why I look at a lot of economic test people want to take out social welfare as well, because it prevents the idea behind it prevents people from actually growing. So
we had been brought up to believe. It was a time when all the fashionable arguments seemed to point to socialism, and nearly all good men among the intellectuals were socialists. For the young idealist of the time, it meant the dashing of all his hopes.
His book, Socialism, is a devastating critique of the system, that the system would not work, and of course he's been proven correct. His smaller book on liberalism, of course, looks at the alternative, a liberal society where individuals are free to make their choices, to pursue their own values. He talks about the political implications of these two different societies. Again,
see, liberalism is right. Does focus on the individual. Where if I can't say if I'm good at languages, I can speak German, I can speak French, I can speak Italian, Spanish, Mandarin, Russian. I can't give that to my local community here in Australia, etc., etc., etc.
and one being a coercive society, socialism, one being a society where men and women deal with each other on the basis of mutual exchange. And he did all of this during one of the grimmest times of our history. I mean, I think it's a shame that a man of that caliber and I think historical importance never won a Nobel Prize. He certainly, if anyone deserved a Nobel Prize in economics for new and original insights, Mises did.
But socialism failed to my mind because just it couldn't succeed. And Ludwig von Mises in his work, Economic Calculation of the Socialist Commonwealth, which was published in 1920, and his
Basic economics. Have a look at their YouTube channel. Thomas Sowell, he's a Queensland guy. That's alright, I'll take this channel. Anyway, guys, look, I'm fucking tired. I'm not focused properly, so I'm going to end the stream really, really shortly and early tonight. So, oh well.